Hey there, Eli coming at you again from OSA Coventry here today in front of our invert system. Today I was hoping to showcase one of the most useful cleanup crew members for pests that we all know and love, known as Aiptasia. So Aiptasia is an unfortunate truth of reef keeping that a lot of us do end up running into. It is a small type of hitchhiking anemone that oftentimes will sneak in on small pieces of rock or new corals that you add to the tank, and as much as nobody loves having Aiptasia in the tank, it is something that 99.9% of reefers are going to come across at one point or another in the aquarium keeping hobby. In this tank behind me here, I do have some lovely little peppermint shrimp, which are really well known for taking care of that Aiptasia problem. These are a great option if you do run into Aiptasia, a biological means of controlling that sort of hitchhiking animal. What's lovely about the peppermint shrimp is that they are very good at getting into some of the nooks and crannies that you really can't reach by hand. So if you do have an Aiptasia problem in your aquarium, and there are Aiptasias that are in spots that you can't reach with, like, say, a paste product like Aiptasia X or a kalkwasser paste, these guys are really helpful because they will get into those tight little nooks and crannies in the rockwork, and they are very skilled at removing those Aiptasias entirely from the rockwork. So especially if you only have a small handful of Aiptasias that somehow hitchhiked into your aquarium, adding a handful of peppermint shrimp into that tank is going to be a lovely way to make sure that they get out. As you can see here behind me, I did sneak a frag plug that had a couple Aiptasias on it, and this little guy up front is making quick work of getting those off of that plug for me. Generally, they are very good at removing those Aiptasias. This is something that they really do prefer to eat, but they are not necessarily specialists when it comes to diet, and they will eat a handful of other things as well. Peppermint shrimp are also known to help with flatworms, which is another great trait from these guys. Another thing that a lot of people do consider pests in the hobby. And there are a handful of different types of flatworms that are definitely pests in the aquarium setting, but these guys are also known to pick at those on occasion. However, it is really worth noting that with the peppermint shrimp, we usually do consider them reef safe with caution. So like I mentioned, they're really good at eating those Aiptasia hitchhikers. However, on occasion, when they do run out of those Aiptasia, or you may just run across one or two out of a handful that are more prone to eating other types of corals or anemones. So it's always worth erring on the side of caution. If you do plan on adding peppermint shrimp, keep that in mind down the road that occasionally the peppermints will nip at other corals, oftentimes things like acans, or sometimes your other species of anemones that you might wish to keep in the aquarium. So it's worth keeping that in mind, and if you do have these types of corals, just keeping a tight watch on those after you add these peppermint shrimp to make sure that they are not acting up in the aquarium, and then having a plan down the road if you do have to rehome them or place them in the sump for safekeeping until you do run across Aiptasias again. Peppermint shrimp do belong to the genus Lysmata, which has a handful of different species. Unfortunately, sometimes in the hobby, you will run across a handful of different species and they are not all created equal. There are a handful that are a little bit better at Aiptasia control than others. However, generally, they are all going to help out with those Aiptasia problems in your aquarium. Just certain species are a little more reef safe than others, and unfortunately, they are not very easy to identify apart to the untrained eye. Also worth note is there's a similar shrimp known as a camel shrimp. They are called camel shrimps because they have a very pronounced hump to the back, but they are very similar in appearance to these guys, but a little more stark of a red and white contrast versus these guys being a little more clear-bodied. And camel shrimp are generally not reef safe. They're not as selective with their diet, and they will eat more than just those Aiptasias in your aquarium. So generally something that if you do plan on trying a camel shrimp would be much more appropriate for a more fish-only centered aquarium. To help with the ease of identification, oftentimes peppermint shrimp are actually becoming aquacultured lately, which is great news. So generally, when you do run across aquacultured specimens, these will be 99.9% reef safe. They're almost always going to eat those Aiptasias in your tank, and because they were raised in aquaria, they generally do not touch most of your stony corals. So that is a great thing about the aquacultured specimen. However, that's something that's always worth asking to see whether those are aquacultured or wild-caught specimen to help in the selection process if you are considering adding peppermint shrimp. As with any of your small shrimps too, or other invertebrates, you do have to be cautious of tank mates with these guys. So the peppermint shrimp are very shy and usually are reclusive when they're added with a handful of fish. But just making sure you don't add these to a tank that's got things like moray eels, like snowflake morays, for some of your puffer fish, even things as small as Valentini and peacock puffers. You just want to be mindful that adding these with those sort of animals, even some of your wrasses like larger Melanurus wrasses, is kind of tricky. Sometimes those fish that are prone to eating cleanup crew members will snack on these guys. So just keep that in mind if you do plan on finding an Aiptasia control method for your aquarium and you do have some of those livestock options in your aquarium. But overall, the peppermint shrimp is a great biological method, a lively option to add to your aquarium to help pick at some of those Aiptasias that might be too hard to reach by hand. And they're generally a pretty budget-friendly option for Aiptasia control, and a great way that once you do get some of those Aiptasias removed from your aquarium by hand, to make sure that any stragglers are taken care of. As always, thank you all for tuning in. Feel free if you have questions, comments, suggestions to leave them in the comment section below. And as always, keep on reefing.